Hello, everybody, and welcome to Tech Leaders Launchpad livestream. I'm Andrew. I'm a leadership trainer and coach specializing in the technology industry. And I started this livestream series because 15 years ago, I became a tech leader. And there weren't a lot of books, people, resources, Slack groups to learn from. And so I had to learn from my own mistakes. And one of the problem with being a leader is when you make mistakes, you're making those mistakes with other people. Computers don't care if you make mistakes when giving them instructions. Computers don't care if you make mistakes when you give them feedback, but people do. And so I spent 15 years learning to be a better tech leader and sharing that with the community. Most recently, I started a company, Tech Leaders Launchpad, which is a community and training dedicated to providing technology leaders the support that I didn't have, and also this live stream where I share my mentors and coaches with you, the people that I learn from to become better. Today, we're going to talk about hiring with Anjuan Simmons. Please feel free to share any questions you've got on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitch, and we'll try to get to as many as we can if we have time. If you have to leave early, don't worry, the session's been recorded and you can come back to it and look at it later, or you can subscribe to the newsletter, which there'll be a link to at the end in order for you to get the recordings emailed to you and remind you about upcoming sessions. Let's get started. Anwan, welcome.
Hey, Andrew. I'm so happy to be here with you. Thanks for letting me come onto your show.
Yeah, no, you're very, very welcome. I saw Anwan in NDC Porto doing a talk on this very, very topic of part of it was on hiring, and I thought, what better person to come along and talk about this topic than somebody who already thinks about it, discusses it, and makes it part of their job. So I'm super grateful to have you on here. I like to start these things with a little bit of an icebreaker. So the icebreaker I've got for you today is, what's your favorite tech gadget that isn't your computer?
Okay. It's a great question. I am a gadget person. And so if you've ever followed me on Twitter, if you know me, I love the tech. And so it's hard to pick one. But I think the one I'm going to pick is a gadget that I use a lot in coming to your home country of Australia just last week when I was in Sydney. And coming from Houston, Texas, which is where I'm based, to Sydney is many hours of flying. And so in preparation, I purchased these glasses. So this is the glass case. So Bitcher makes these glasses. Um, they're not AR. They're not like the glasses that Apple just deployed at their last event. But these glasses, if you put them on, they give you a screen, right? So it's hard to see on camera, but these little basically devices that beam a screen into your eyes. So when you wear them, and I don't have it plugged in, but there's a connection that you can plug it into an iPhone. You can plug them into something like this, which is a Steam Deck, and it gives you this floating 120-inch screen that no one else can see but you. And it's really great for those long haul flights. And so I watched a couple of Netflix movies on the flight just coming from my phone. I played Baldur's Gate 3 a couple of times, leveled up some of my characters during the flight. And it made a very long flight seem very, very short. So this is my current obsession when it comes to tech gadgets.
That's very cool because, like, you're on a plane, you've got your laptop, you've got your iPad. It just gets in the way all the time. You put it on the tray table, and then you're like trying to move around it. Your food comes. Where do you put your iPad when the food comes? Like, that just solves all of those problems.
Absolutely. I mean, and literally while I had these on, I did all of that. One, I didn't have to look down at the screen for several hours, so I had no neck pain. When the food came, I just ate my meals, watching a movie or whatever. And so it very much solved all these problems. So they're not cheap, but they were a very good investment for those of you who do a lot of flying.
And you look very cool while you're wearing them.
Oh, you're very generous, but I appreciate it. You will be flying your nerd flag very high, which I don't mind flying my nerd flag as high as possible if you have these on. But hey, if you're in the community, welcome.
Yeah, I have no problem flying my nerd flag. I generally wear t-shirts that have some kind of nerd reference on them, so I fly my nerd flag pretty high.
Exactly.
Awesome. Okay. So why don't let's kind of kick off with tell me about you, Anjuan. Tell me about, your career to date. I know you've had some experience with consultancies. You're now working in product companies. What's kind of the highlights you've had and some of the things you've learned through that journey?
Yeah, for sure. So I started my career out of undergraduate college. I was electrical engineering as my bachelor's. I went to UT Austin, Hook 'em Horns, and I graduated from UT. I'm going to date myself and let you know the year in 1997. And my first job was at what was then called Anderson Consulting, now called Accenture. And I spent my first few years in my career as a software developer at Accenture doing enterprise class applications. I'm talking Oracle, I'm talking SAP, I'm talking CRM, large enterprise, industrial grade applications. And that's where I learned how to work on teams. It's also where I learned to lead teams. It's also where I learned how to hire because I did my first hiring as a manager at Accenture. I was at Accenture for actually quite a while, at Accenture for a decade. I moved over to Deloitte and Infosys. So that was the consulting part of my career for the most part. And then I heard about these things in the mid 2000s called startups. And I began to join startups. And I like to think of my current style as a mix of both the rigor that you get working at Accenture and Deloitte, but also with the personal touch and I wanted to roll my sleeves up and get work done that you have to have at startups. And so those were my major formative years. I'm currently what's called a staff engineering manager at a little company called GitHub. And I've been working at GitHub for the past year and a half. I do have to say, though, that I'm going to give you a lot of, during this talk, a lot of things from my career at various companies. I am not an authorized representative of any of those companies. So don't hold them don't hold them liable for what I have to share. I think I have a lot of good experiences, but I'm not an authorized speaker for either GitHub or Accenture, those companies. But we're going to have fun in this conversation, share with you a lot of the things that I've learned that work well, but a lot of the things also that I have seen to not work so well.
No, thank you for that. I kind of see it as my job on the live streams to make the advice that my guests give me actionable. There can be a lot of this stuff where we're just talking about theory and I kind of see it as my job to no, give me specific tips. And I know from the talk you did in Porto that you're also a fan of theory is great, but let's talk actual actions. Let's talk about what we can do. I'd also love to touch on that point about consultancies. Like I had a very similar experience. I started my first ever professional job was in government. And then I moved from government to consultancy and then from consultancy to startup. So very, very, very similar journey. And there's a lot of upsides and downsides to all three of those. I think, that it's not a case that the startup or product world is the best or the consulting world is the best. There's upsides and downsides of all of them. And I think it really depends on you as a person and where you are in your life, which one fits you best.
Absolutely. And, I encourage folks that if you have the career flexibility to try both, work at a large company and see what it's like at a large company, work at a startup and see that. I think that your career will be better and you'll get tools and techniques from both worlds to apply to whatever leader or whatever contributor or coder that you want to be. So I think both worlds are helpful to learn from.
Yeah, it really helps you empathize with people that have maybe come from different pathways as well. Like if you've never worked in a consultancy, it can be sometimes hard to empathize with the mindset of somebody that has and the way that they see the world. So the more well-rounded and generalized you are as a leader, the better you can lead the diverse people under you.
Absolutely.
Awesome. All right. So I've, as always with this stuff, I've got a series of questions that I've prepared for Anjuan, but hopefully they're only going to take us 10, 15 minutes into this discussion and we can spend the rest of the time answering questions from the audience. So please feel free to ask questions on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitch. And we will see your questions and we will post your questions on the screen so that Anjuan and I can talk about that.
Absolutely.
To start off with, let's discuss what are the common mistakes that you think companies and individuals make in hiring for positions?
Oh, there are so many. I would say one thing that comes to mind is that a lot of companies don't tell people what their hiring process is. And therefore, when people want to work for your company, it's exploring some mystery that's wrapped in an enigma that's defined by some weird set of parameters that you're just guessing, or maybe you hear from people who've gone through the process. So the first mistake is not accurately letting people know what the process is. And anytime I've hired at a company, I always take pains to try to make sure that it should be somewhere on the website where this is how we hire. This is the process, right? So, and most companies have a very similar thing. There's a funnel where people apply to the position. The ones that make it through get to probably initial screen with the recruiter. Then when you pass that, you talk to maybe the hiring manager, maybe you have an initial screen. Then if it's a software development role, you probably have a technical portion, then there's maybe like a behavioral portion, then you proceed to an offer. So there's many variations in how you do this, but I think it's a big mistake to not give people a sense of like, what are they going to encounter with you? Your process, your hiring process is an expression of who you are as a company. And I think it's just an act of kindness to then just let people know what they're in for when they're doing that. So that's one thing. I think another common mistake that people make when hiring is, and this is again going to like the face that people see when they come across your company, and that's often your corporate website. And that's not letting people know the diversity and the richness of the people at your company. I think that if possible, I mean, if it's true for your company, showing that your company has a diversity of genders, a diversity of gender identities and races, that your company reflects the diversity of the world that you're trying to serve. Because the world is diverse, ideally, your company will be diverse, which will attract diverse candidates. So I think that those are really two big common mistakes that are actually fairly easy to solve. One, you can throw up a web page that lets people know what the process is. And then secondly, you can ideally reflect the diversity of your organization in your website, or at least show that you're working on it. I think that those are very, very common mistakes that hopefully have very low barriers to fixing.
Yeah, I really like both of those. The first one, I like that idea that it's the expression of your company. I think the number of interviews, the content of the interviews is also an expression of the things you value as a company. If you're say, for example, interviewing for a leadership position and you've got 6 interviews and 4 of those 6 interviews are in-depth technical interviews, then you're saying to candidates, we really preference those in-depth technical skills in our leaders. Whereas if you've got 6 interviews and 4 of the 6 are people, process, strategy stuff, then you're saying, okay, well, what we value in our leaders is these things. So it's a great signal to people to what you value as an organization is how you go through that hiring process.
Yeah, I'll do you one better. This is often considered to be a radical idea. It's one that I've championed. It's one that I've convinced at least one company to do. And that is, I think you should make your interview questions public. I think that you should put somewhere where candidates at least can get to them. Hey, here are the questions that you'll be asked at that initial screen. Here are the behavioral questions, or at least put the question bank. Now, you may not ask every question, but just like you said, Andrew, your interview process and your interview questions are a reflection and a communication of who you are as a company and what you value. Now, when I say that I think that these questions should be public, people often say, oh, well, people are just going to memorize answers, or you'll get like regurgitated, kind of really neat answers. And one, I think that good questions don't lend themselves to easy memorized responses. And two, you can always follow up on their answer and dig deeper. And there are two major reasons that I think it's really useful to make your interview questions public. I'll say three. One is what I just said. It lets people know what you value. It lets people know what you care about and who you are as a company for every single role that you're hiring for. Secondly, there are people that are going to probably want to work at your company where English is not their first language, right? I've worked at multiple companies where candidates came in and English is their second or third language. And so when you're doing an interview, And most companies in America, we ask questions in English. So I'm asking you a question as the interviewer in English. You're hearing in English, you're translated to French or German or Farsi, whatever your language is, getting an answer, and then you're translating it back into English to tell me. And like all those round trips are really unfair to people who may be English native speakers. And so it levels the playing field where you give candidates the opportunity to put their best foot forward no matter what their English, I'm sorry, no matter what their native language is, because we should be welcoming of our talent no matter what language it happened to learn first, right? And the third benefit of making your interview questions public is that there's some people like me who aren't great at like off the cuff responses. I mean, I'll give an okay response, but I cannot tell you, Andrew, how many times I've left an interview, I go out to my car, I'm driving away, and I'm like, I had a better answer. It just didn't come to me because I had like 20 seconds to come up with it, right? By doing that, by making your interview questions public, you're again giving and you're making an environment where people can really bring their best selves to the interview, and you want to be able to select as a hiring manager from people's best, not from something that actually privileges some people over others.
Yeah, I love that last point. I think, the common retort or the common way people try to dismiss that idea is, well, we want to see how people respond under pressure. And the thing is that, if we work for 40 hours a week, how many of those 40 hours a week require you to respond the answer to a question, in 20 seconds? To the
Right.
first approximation, zero. So there's
Exactly. I
very,
mean,
very
we
few
don't
situations.
Yeah, we don't throw people out of airplanes with a parachute that may or may not deploy and say, write this code while you fall toward the earth at terminal velocity. No, we don't. We very rarely do things where it's like you have 10 seconds. No, you have, hey, by the end of the week, fix this. And so you have all the resources that we have as developers. You have coworkers, you have Stack Overflow, you have, and so we create environments, hopefully, where you do have time for thoughtful, reasoned responses. We should give people the same environment when they're trying to work for our companies. And so I'm with you. I don't think that that explanation of seeing how people operate under pressure really has a lot of. I don't think it's very valid. I think you get way more from making your questions public than you lose.
Yeah, I agree. And your other point on diversity, you talked about displaying that diversity on a website. I think the second step of that is making sure your diversity is shown in your interview panel. If you see a website that
Absolutely.
says our team, with a hugely diverse team, and then you go through the interview process and it's 6 interviews and all of the interviewers are stale, pale, and male, it doesn't really show your diversity.
Absolutely. And this is especially important. I'm glad that you raised this, Andrew, because often the people that are doing the interviews are usually highly placed, right? They're people managers, they're hiring managers, they're eng managers, maybe even directors or VPs. And so if you have a diverse set of people at those levels, you're showing that your company has the capability to not just to attract and hire a diverse pool, but to support them through promotion. So if you're able to show that in the interview panel, and again, you have to have done the work in advance for this, that sends an extremely powerful signal to the people that you really are more than what's on your website. This is real for you as a company.
Yeah, I totally agree. We got a comment from Andrew Lyons. Agree with the sentiment. Versatility is such an important skill, which you can only gain through experience and exposure. I think I agree largely with that comment. As a leader, having a huge diversity of experience makes you, able to deal with multiple different scenarios. There's always this challenge as a professional in general, which is how broad you go with your experience versus how deep you go with your experience. And I think it's really hard to make those calls, and indexing too far one way or the other leads to failure.
I agree. We have the idea of like a T-shaped developer, right? You're conversant in a lot of different things, but then you can go deep in one area. And I think if you can do that, then that's really powerful. And that deep area is probably going to change because our industry changes all the time. But if you have the ability to go deep in a few areas, you're probably going to be able to do those in new areas. So I think that if you can do that, if you can be T-shaped, then that's really powerful for your career.
Agreed. Okay, so we've talked a lot about I guess the pre-interview steps, the stuff that we can do before we get somebody in front of you in person or on Zoom. But once you've got that person there and you're kind of going, okay, how do I evaluate this person and how I think they'll be a great part of my team? What are you looking for when you're interviewing somebody? What are the key qualities you look for?
Sure. I mean, there is obviously the nuts and bolts of the role. Typically, whether you're looking for a senior engineer or a staff engineer or a principal, then there are certain numbers of years of experience that we're looking for that roughly line up with that. And I always try to make sure that we make it very clear that sure, we like the uni degrees in computer science, but we also value equivalent experience. If you came through a boot camp or if you were self-taught, some of my best tech leads have been people that came from boot camps, or even one was self-taught. So I always want to make sure that we are sourcing for that. But again, there's the nuts and bolts of the role. Are you conversant in the tech stack that we use? Ideally, you've used a number of tech stacks, right? So obviously working for GitHub, a lot of Ruby, a lot of Rails, a lot of JavaScript, things like that. So we're looking for the nuts and bolts of the role. So, past that, right? Past, do I think you have the skill set that you need to have to be successful at the organization that I'm hiring for? I want to know, did you work on teams? And I can source for that by asking a simple question. Tell me about your current team. Or if you're between jobs, tell me about the last team that you worked on. And if I get answers that seem to indicate that maybe you and one other person were basically turning out code all day, well, that may be the case, but like, where were the other team members? Where was the product manager? Was there a designer? Who was your manager, right? I'm looking for people to show when I ask them, tell me about your team, who were the people on your team, what functions were present. Again, was there a product function, a design function, a manager? As you work across teams, I'm looking for people that have worked in the structure that we really use, not only at GitHub where I'm now, but at like multiple companies going back to Accenture. I'm looking for the ability to show that you collaborated. I'm looking for the ability to show that, yes, you did some really good results and that you had impact, but it shouldn't be you were the person doing all the work, right? That usually means that you may not be the kind of team player that we're looking for, right? A good candidate will be very clear on what they did. They'll give credit to the people who helped them be successful. They're also talking about the structure that they operated in. So I'm looking for a little bit about process. Did you have daily stand-ups? Did you work in sprints? Maybe you didn't have those, but like, how did you think about work? So those are the candidates that I find to be more successful, like above and beyond just the nuts and bolts of the role. Um, I do want to go back to something that I said about working with other groups. Um, it's really important that, like I said, you talk about your impact. A lot of candidates come into the interview and they're talking about just activity. Like, I did this, and I did that. And hey, I get that. I can very much follow what you're saying, but I'm not hiring someone to give me activity. I am hiring someone to give me impact. I'm looking for impact for the team, impact for the customers, impact for the company. So I really encourage people, if you're watching this, either live or the recording, you want to be able to quantify what you did. Did you, through your efforts, improve the PR review process? Did you improve the rate of defects going to production? Did you improve the way that product managers wrote specs to make it easier to consume by the team? Did you introduce this way? And what was the improvement, right? Did you improve time to production? Did you reduce errors, right? You want to be able to talk about that because, again, as a hiring manager, I'm looking for people to bring impact. not just activity. It's really easy to have a lot of activity and actually very little impact. And conversely, it's possible with very little activity, but just in how you work, to have a really big impact. And the people who can talk about their impact, they're going to move the needle in terms of like my ability to perceive what they can do if I hire them.
Yeah, there's a lot of great points in that. I know that a large part of our audience are people who are maybe not in leadership positions, but are aspiring to leadership positions. And I think, what you've just said there is really important for them to kind of, recognize and understand in the way they think about the work that they're doing on a day-to-day basis. What impact is the work you're making now? Because that does two things. It means that you're focused on it now, so you add value now, you create impact now, but you're also building this library of examples that you can bring to a future interview. It's the problem that we often have as professionals is we get so focused on the here and now that we forget about the future. And I encourage a lot of my leaders that report into me to create a brag document of all the times they did something good, because A, it helps them recognize the value that they're adding now, but B, it helps them in the future come performance reviews or interviews, etc. And that brag document should focus on exactly what you said: impact over activities or responsibilities.
Absolutely. I'm going to give Julia Evans her flowers. If you Google Julia Evans brag doc, to me, she wrote the canonical resource about a brag doc, and follow Julia Evans in general because Julia is brilliant. But you're exactly right. This is not just for if you're looking for a job. As you manage your career, most of you, if you work at a company, there are performance periods. There's probably an annual process. There might be a mid-year and one at the end of the year. But by keeping a brag doc that is impact centered, you're creating a living repository of what you've done. Because I'm going to tell you, you're going to forget what you worked on probably not long after you've done it. So once you realize that you have achieved impact, write it down. What was the impact? What did you do? I have had so many direct reports where when I first started working with them and we get to the annual review process, they're pulling up all the PRs. And, GitHub is easy, right? Git never forgets, right? So Git remembers. And so you can go through all the commits and all the PRs and all that. And like, that's interesting, but that has nothing to do with what impact you had. So you do want to track the activity. And I want to say, and I don't want to say that that has no value, but what's really more valuable, if you can translate that activity into the impact you had, like I said, for the team, for the company, for our customers. That's powerful.
Yeah. And just to put a button in that before we move on, if you're having a discussion with your boss or you're trying to negotiate salary with a new employer, at the end of the day, I come from consultancies, and so I know this is a reductionist point of view, but the salary you're paid is a reflection of the impact you make in an organization. And if you want to be paid more money, you've got to make more impact. And so, having that focus on impact is how you can kind of justify higher salary in the future.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So my next question is, we're hiring technologists, we're hiring people who have a lot of the impact that they make through the creation of technology artifacts. How do you balance the skills that you're looking for in terms of those technology skills, but also the culture fit or the culture add side of what they bring to the team, and also how do you balance the diversity angle of that? We want to be aware of similarity bias, and we don't want to be hiring everybody that fits the same mold. So how do you balance those things? The technical skills, culture fit, and culture add.
Yeah, it's a great point. I liked that you added the term culture add, because culture fit often is something that has unintended consequences, right? If your company is at the beginning of its diversity inclusion journey, then the culture may be monolithic. So you're asking people to fit into what you're trying to fix, right? I think it's really important that you do culture add, right? What can these candidates add to our culture? What are some of the things that we're missing in our culture that we want to add, that we want to be welcoming, right? So For example, you may be missing certain voices from the trans community or from certain gender communities. And so you want to make sure that you're sourcing for that, that you have a mindset. So I think the first thing to do is to have a mindset for what other voices in our company, in our teams that we're missing. And you have to have very honest and often hard conversations about that. And then you have to really partner with your recruiting function. Now, I'm an engineering manager. I've been in engineering for my entire career, but I have highly benefited from partnering with recruiting. So if you are a hiring manager, it is imperative that you work with recruiting. I would like week one, figure out where's recruiting, take them out for coffee, have a virtual coffee with them, whatever, because like those are the people that will help you source candidates. Because I find that as a hiring manager, it's really, really powerful to have the recruiting function be very robust and to be partners in being equitable and inclusive and diverse because it's in the sourcing that you get candidates that are diverse. And then as a hiring manager, that gives me the tools to be able to understand kind of who's coming and then where can I get the candidates that not only can do the job, but can add to the culture. And so I think it's very important to just help recruiting understand that. Some of the recruiting things that you may need to convince your recruiting partners to do is look in different places because often we get homogenous results when we keep going to the same places. And there may need to be new places that you go to. You may need to go to job boards that cater to certain identities and source from there. Often you have to fish in different lakes to catch different fish, right? So it's very important that you do that. One other thing that I've done at least one company, and that I think is really important to do, is it's not just in the hiring process itself, right? Because if you partner with recruiting and you diversify the places that they go, you're going to get really qualified, great, and diverse candidates. And then ideally, you'll be lucky enough to convince them to work for your company. But one thing that I've done is do what's called a hiring summary. And the way that I typically do this is this is especially important for like leadership, right? So any kind of management level and higher, but I would even say for like ICs, you just say, okay, for this job posting, here are all the people who applied. Here are all the people of the applicant pool who were women. Here are all the people that identified as a person of color. You have to be careful because how you determine that, make sure, hey, this is why recruiting is important because they partner with HR and can get the legal framework in place. But you want to give people, you want to paint the picture of how did this person come out with the job? And you want to do that because where there's silence, people fill the void with their assumptions. And by publishing a hiring summary, again, really important for leadership, you can show we followed a process. 900 people applied, this many were men and women, this many people made it to the next level, this many people made it to the final interview, this many people, we gave an offer to, because you want to show that this was not a diversity hire. The hiring summary lets people know the rigor that you applied to the process, and it hopefully increases the chance that the candidate who got the job is clearly the most qualified and the strongest candidate for the role. So I highly encourage companies to do hiring summaries because that's a diversity move. That's making sure that people, when you start getting those diverse hires, because if you're not diverse, you want to be very clear that you're adding to the company voices and identities that can do amazing work there and also help the company move forward from that. So hiring summaries, they don't take a lot of work. They're really, really easy to do once you've done a few, but they can be very powerful, especially once the candidates are in place and they're having to go with the leadership mandate and get things done.
Yeah, that idea of showing that something isn't a diversity hire, I think that's kind of something that's powerful internally, but I think it also helps the person moving into that role. I've spoken to a lot of diverse candidates, and there's often we all get imposter syndrome. We all worry that we got the job because we're good at talking, not good at actually doing the job, or good at being interviewed. And so, often diverse candidates have this additional thought running through their head, which is, did I get the job because I was a diversity hire? And having that hiring summary helps them overcome some of that imposter syndrome as well.
Yeah, and I would say for people who wonder if there were a diversity hire, you probably were not, because companies hire people to make money. And you make money by hiring people who can be successful. But you're exactly right. A hiring summary is an investment in telling the story of someone who represents the kinds of people you want more of. And one of the most diverse and inclusive things you can do is tell that person's story, especially before they even probably start at the company. You're saying, I'm willing, by doing something like a hiring summary, you're saying, I'm willing to invest in telling your story to the company so that I can hopefully increase the chance that you'll be able to tell more and better stories once you're here. And so it is a gift that you can give to the people who often, to your point, have to come with the companies and struggle with imposter syndrome, or struggle with even just the hard path that underrepresented groups often have in technology. And I can tell you that the candidates who do come in and they see the hiring summary, it takes a little bit of the pressure off, right? And so it is an amazing gift that is really an investment in that leader and that leader's future, and then the capabilities that that leader has, and unlocking the ability for them to give their full selves to the job.
Yeah, you've spoken a lot about the diversity angle for this, and it doesn't surprise me that you have written a book on this topic. So why don't you
That's right.
talk about that and discuss what the book is about for a few minutes?
Sure. Yes. So my Minority Tech is the title of my book. You can go to minoritytech.com. And I wrote this a few years ago because I realized that as a Black person in tech, I was one of a few. And that's still the case. Things have gotten way better than when I wrote the book several years ago. But I wrote the book to, one, let other people know that you can be in technology as a Black person, as a minority. There's a place for you. Here's my story. If there's things that you can learn from my journey to make yours easier, that's fantastic. I also wanted to let people know that hiring a minority in tech is not like hiring like a pink elephant, right? You're hiring a technologist. They just happen to have taken probably a path that a lot of the people who work for your company don't. They've probably had a life that a lot of the people who work at your company right now have not lived. But also with that, you're getting perspectives that you probably don't have a lot of in your company. So I wanted to make the case that investing in inclusion should be more than just like a marketing gimmick, something you do because it's that time of the year where we do Pride months or whatever, but that you're actually investing in innovation. You're investing in a better workforce by investing in inclusion. So Minority Tech was my way of doing those things. And so it's a book that I wrote several years ago. I've learned a lot since then. If I ever write another one, I'm sure I'll revisit some topics, but also probably reframe a few. But that's the book, and that was what I hoped to do with the book. Still very proud of it. I have not published a book since then. I do hope it's not the last book that I publish, but I'm really happy with what that book has done. So yeah, super honored to have been able to say that I've authored a book.
Awesome. If you ever write a follow-up or a second edition, I would love to have you back and we can talk about what you learned since and the changes. And that'd be awesome.
Absolutely. I will happily come back for sure.
Awesome. Okay, so last topic, we've talked a lot about looking for leadership talent. We've talked a lot about the pipeline. I'd like to turn our lens a little bit towards technology, like where technologists. And one of the challenges you can get when you're hiring in this industry is trying to hire people for new, emerging, rapidly evolving technologies. If you're hiring somebody for something that was created a year ago, they can't have 5 years of experience in that thing. So how do you do that? How do you hire people for technologies and frameworks and new things that didn't exist 12, 24 months ago?
Yeah. So I'm an old person, right? So, I mean, Andrew, if it's not clear, I just, again, further date myself, I turned 50 this year, right? So at the end of this year, I will end 2024 as a 50-year-old man. So, and I've been in tech my entire career. So it's been a while. I do try not to be that kind of get off my lawn kind of old tech person. But like my answer to this question is that yes, there are new technologies, but at the end of the day, there's data storage somewhere, there's compute power somewhere, there's logic somewhere, there's a presentation layer somewhere for most, unless it's not a purely back-end technology. All those things have existed for decades. And I always try to make sure that when I'm trying to find someone I want to work in a new technology, I want to see how they worked in the new technology a year ago or 2 years ago, and that they were able to understand it, do some work in it, grow while doing it, and then do the next thing. Because at the end of the day, all these technologies in general do the same thing, right? One example is Kubernetes, right? Kubernetes is still, it's probably not as hot as it was 3 or 4 years ago, but I mean, it's still a big part of development. And back in my day, we used virtual machines that had local virtual hard drives that you could spin up, and then boom, you have like Windows whatever NT running on a machine, and you could do things with it. You could even like migrate that virtual image to different places. And again, Kubernetes is way more sophisticated, way more powerful, but the concepts are very similar. So for almost any technology that we're using now, I can probably find its dad, granddad, great granddad from somewhere in my career. And I would hope that people who want to do that can show that they worked with the ancestors of these technologies. And so if you don't have the experience in the exact tech, whatever it is, I'm looking for, do you have the predecessor to this tech? And then there's just nuts and bolts, solid engineering practices that I can go through in the interview, right? No matter what technology that you're going to use, you probably should be able to talk about performance and what you did to make it performant. You probably talk about unit test coverage, right? And what you do to do that. So there are certain things that I think are, agnostic to the actual solution, but that are good practices. So I'm also sourcing not only for have you worked with the predecessors of these technologies, but do you have good, solid engineering practices that really should transcend whatever the current state of the art is. Now, maybe one day we'll have AI machines writing everything while we, float on, levitating hammocks and we drink tea and eat watermelon. I don't know. But until then, you still have to write tests. You still have to store data somewhere. You still have to do the things that have been true, at least since the internet came on board. And so that's what I'm searching for when there's a new technology, because usually a lot of those concepts have been around for a long
time. I think another angle that you kind of touched on, but to flesh out, is like the growth mindset of being willing to pick up these things. Like that's kind of a precursor to a lot of what you're saying there. Is I absolutely adore boot camps. I think boot camps are an amazing addition to our industry, bringing in a whole heap of diversity into our industry. People who have had careers in different areas coming into our industry. But I think one of the issues with them is often because they focus on just teaching a very, very specific, narrow technology set, is you often get people leaving the boot camps saying phrases such as, I am a Ruby on Rails developer. And it's like, I always feel like saying to those people, no, you're not. You're a developer that knows Ruby on Rails. Like the focus in those two statements is fundamentally different. If you box yourself in as a Ruby on Rails developer, then what happens when it's not as popular as it is? If you think about yourselves as a developer who knows Ruby on Rails, you're going to be more open to learning new things and seeing where the industry takes you, and maybe you'll find something you enjoy even more.
Totally. I mean, in the pre-show, I mentioned that over my long career, some of the best tech leads were people who came from boot camps. I will also say some of the best tech leads are people who did not have a computer science degree from uni. They were self-taught. some of the best tech leads I had, their first careers were like being a librarian or being a speech pathologist or being a book publisher, like, or being a professional chef, right? We have all these different ways of coming into the industry. I really hope that we can value the diversity of those backgrounds, but also the diversity of the languages. And that as a developer, you should expect to learn whatever language that you need to get the job, just to be honest, but you should expect to learn way more and be able to be enough that you should be expected to be fungible enough to learn new languages, to pick them up, to do what's fit for purpose. Because so many jobs that you're going to go to will not be in the stack that you're using right now. And the ability to do those linkages between what you're doing in Ruby to what they're doing in Python or what they're doing in React or what they're doing in Angular, whatever it is, in the new stack, like that's a skill that is as fundamental as like unit test coverage, and that you should be able to develop and show that in your career. So I would even say, to the degree that you can, seek out new languages as you modify and you navigate your career, because that will redound to your benefit tremendously. You become one better at those languages, because one way to become better at a language is to learn new ones, but you'll also be more valuable. And I really think you'll have more fun if you pick up different languages along the way.
Yeah, I love looking at the differences between languages and frameworks and trying to understand the rationale of why that difference exists. You know, when Swift first came out, I was the
Yeah,
nerd that printed off the Swift manual and literally read it cover to cover. I've never
I
written a
love
line
that.
of Swift in my life. Never written a line of Swift.
Okay, good for you.
But I love the idea of like, well, why did they make that choice?
From
What
Objective
things,
C,
because
yeah,
exactly, like, engineering is all about trade-offs. What trade-offs were they
absolutely.
making here? What decisions were they making, and what were they trying to prioritize over other things? And understanding those concepts, I think, makes you a better, more thoughtful engineer.
Yeah, every language from C to C++ to C sharp to whatever was a set of decisions, and that decision set make up the language. And if you can understand that, then I think you're better to understand what this language is useful for. And then you'll be able to understand other languages and the decision sets that frame them. And then again, you'll be better. So good for you. I've never printed out a whole spec for a language, but that's actually quite powerful. I'll probably need to do that for whatever language that I pick up next.
Yeah, it took me a while to go through it, but it was a lot of fun. But like I said, I fly my nerd flag pretty high, so I have no
There you go.
problem talking about that.
And I salute that
We
flag for sure.
Thank you, thank you. We've approaching the end of another Tech Leaders live stream. As always, I cannot believe how quickly these things go. Thank you very much, Anwan, for joining me.
Hey, it went fast, but it's been fun. And thank you so much for letting me come on your show. I had a blast.
Yeah, no, always, and you're welcome back anytime you want. As for what we're doing next, I do these live streams roughly fortnightly. Sometimes, the schedule of the people I'm getting on dictates that a little bit. Our next live stream is on the 8th of March with Michael Lopp, who you might know as his online pseudonym, Rams. He writes a blog post called Rams in Repose. And we're going to talk about delegation and how you can delegate until it hurts. Often what I do with these live streams is I say to people, if you could have a message that you could implant in the brain of every single tech leader in the world, what would it be? And Michael's answer was delegate until it hurts. So we're going to dissect that topic as much as we possibly can. If you want to join me, the event is already posted on LinkedIn and YouTube. LinkedIn Live are a great platform for exposure, but they're not a great platform for your experience as a viewer. And so I do encourage you to make the move over to YouTube. You will have a better experience because of it. If you want to stay on LinkedIn Live, by all means do so. But I'm telling you, the experience is better on YouTube for you. If you also want to know a little bit about me and what I do these live streams. I also do regular posts on LinkedIn. Then there's links to all of that kind of stuff there. If you also want to subscribe to my newsletter so you don't miss these events, there's a link there as well. If you want to grab a 20-minute chat with me to talk about anything to do with technology, there's also a QR code there. Anjuan, is there anything you want to share? Is there anywhere you want to send people?
Hey, I'm easy to find online by design. I have a very unique first name, so I'm at Anjuan, at ANJUAN, and on all the socials. Please follow. I will love to continue this conversation and also form new connections. Looking forward to meeting all of you.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Anjuan, and thank you everybody for joining me on another Tech Leaders live stream.